Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our brother Dennis with his sermon study, Revelation chapter 8, the first four trumpets. Brother Dennis.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Somebody once asked me if I was a glutton for punishment when I do the Revelation studies. Maybe. You should be getting a handout. You know, one of the questions that's asked often is how did Apostle John die? You know, and we really don't have a definitive answer. We only have the traditions that are handed down from the early church fathers. You know, we know that the Apostle John was exiled for his faith late in life. The general consensus seems to be that he was about 90 years old. And the Bible does not really give us the details on how he died, but tradition gives us a few theories. The most plausible theory of John's death states that John was arrested in Ephesus, and he faced martyrdom when his enemies threw him into a huge basin of boiling oil. However, according to the tradition, John was miraculously delivered from death. The authorities then sentenced John to slave labor in the mines of Patmos, the island from which he writes this book. And we are told that he was later freed on the death of Caesar Domitian, and possibly due to old age, and he was returned to Turkey, and the notion is that he died around AD 98, and the only one of the apostles to have a peaceful death. Ultimately, it is not essential to know how the apostle died. What is important is that he was not afraid to die for what he believed to be true. And that goes for all the apostles, all the early church fathers. You know, so this notion that they made this stuff up is very hard to believe when you see men willing to give their lives for what they believe was the truth. And there are many mentioned: Justin Martyr, Papias, Polycarp. Papias was known to be a student of John's, and so he passed on to Polycarp what he knew about the Apostle John, and particularly about the book of Revelation, which, again, we are told was given to John while he was on the Isle of Patmos. Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Theophilus of Antioch, not the one in Luke, they all claim the same thing. They all state the same thing. John is the author of the book of Revelation. And they all pretty much cling to the same story of tradition of how he died. And so as we read this book, you know, we are promised that we are going to be blessed by it. And so whatever blessing you take out of today's lesson, you take it and you run with it. I'm going to give you, obviously, my interpretation. I've said this before. About the book of Revelation. I believe it is a detail about the battle between good and evil that goes on down through the centuries. Paul tells us in Ephesians to be strong and mighty in the Lord's power. Put on the full armor so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Why? Because our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. But against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. And I think that's the admonition that is given to every Christian down through the centuries. All right? Stay faithful, stay strong, stand firm in the truth of God's word. And so my interpretation this morning, there's actually four different, I'm going to share them with you, four different ways to view the book of Revelation. So I don't really know how you view the book of Revelation. Quite frankly, not that I care, I don't care. You're going to hear my view. All right? And, whether you accept it or reject it, praise the Lord. You have the historicist view. Now, this view teaches that Revelation is a symbolic representation that presents the course of history from the apostles' life through the end of the age. The symbols in the apocalypse correspond to events in the history of Western Europe, including various popes, the Protestant Reformation, the French Revolution, and rulers such as Charlemagne. Most interpreters place the events of their day in the later chapters of the book of Revelation. Okay. I don't have too much of a problem with that, so whatever view you're really going to take, there's only one view here that I think is nuts, and I'll tell you, we'll get to that one. The futurist view. This view teaches that the events of the Olivet Discourse in Revelation chapters 4 to 22 are all future. And they have not happened yet. And so they divide the book, they divide the book into three sections. You know, in verse 19 of chapter 1, the angel tells John, he says, I'm about to show you what you have seen, what is now, and what will take place. And so they divide the book into those three sections. Most of our evangelical brethren, a lot of Bible students, all take this view. That these are events that are going to be described and happen, and I don't hold to that view, obviously. The preterist view. Preter means past. And so full preterists believe that all the prophecies found in Revelation were fulfilled in AD 70. And that we are now living in the eternal state, or the new heavens and the new earth. We're living in it right now. You know what I say to that, right? Yeah, if this is the best it's going to get, we're in big trouble. All right. Chapters 20 to 22 point to future events that are as future resurrection of believers and return of Christ to the earth. So they got some hope there. But I don't really go that. Yes, I go with the idealist view. An idealist. The first view of Revelation is the idealist view, the spiritual view. This view uses the allegoric method to interpret the book of Revelation. All right? It was first introduced by the ancient church, so I'm not the first to do this. Origen did this. Augustine did this. According to this view, the events of Revelation are not tied to specific historical events. The imagery of the book symbolically represents the ongoing struggle throughout the ages of God between Satan and good against evil. In this struggle, the saints are persecuted and martyred by the forces of evil, but will one day receive their vindication. And so hence why we are encouraged in the New Testament scriptures, don't take vengeance. Vengeance belongs to the Lord. And judgment will be meted out as just as God is holy and pure. In the end, God is victorious and his sovereignty is displayed throughout the ages. And so I do take a couple of things from the others, but mainly the view I'm presenting to you is the idealist view. I believe there's a lot of symbolism and metaphors and pictures that are given to us. I'm going to share with you the pictures I see in the first 4 trumpets, and they're there for your taking. One of the questions that was asked as we get into these 4 trumpets is why a third? You know, and in the first trumpet it says a third of the earth was burned, a third of the trees. You see third used quite a bit throughout Revelation. In fact, when the dragon is thrown to the earth, his tail grabs a third of the stars and takes them with it. I had to look this up because I didn't really have a view. I knew I didn't take it literal because it stated so much. In fact, you know, if you take it literal, I mean, a third of the earth is going to get burned up. That's bad news for whoever's living on the earth. I don't think the revelator, I don't think the angel who was telling John this is interested in being exact. Just that the activity affected a certain group. And one person proposed, he says, well, the number 3 represents unity. And so when you take one of those things away, hence unity is broken.